Hello, Ben. Welcome to the show.
Hello, nice to speak to you. Thanks for having me on.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for joining us today, and you're calling from the UK.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, in Somerset, beautiful part of England, not far from Glastonbury. Beautiful place.
Beautiful, famous for music festivals and cider.
Yeah, indeed. And who knows? Maybe UFOs as well. But yeah, I'm actually, to be specific, I'm in a place called Nether Stowey, which is famous for the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, who was very imaginative, one of the great artists of our time and thinkers. And I'm also a stone's throw away from Hinkley Point as well, which is quite interesting as well as a possible UFO hotspot, I guess. But yeah, it's an amazing place, Somerset, one of the best places in the country.
I agree. Lovely. Okay, Ben, you have some experiences to share. Would you like to start at the beginning, please, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my approach to the whole subject comes from a myriad of angles, really. I, as a kid, was always very, very interested in ufology and science fiction to a degree, but I was never like a mad sort of sci-fi geek kind of kid. I came with it very much from a novel angle because my great-gran was an unusual character. She was very much my old mum. She sort of brought me up for most of my childhood. And she was psychic, and she didn't take money for it, but she was great. She was like a palmist. She knew dates, names, all sorts, very accurate. And she used to read an Isaac Asimov a day. She was very much into science fiction. But she also had a deep love of actual ufology. So there'd be Zachariah Sitchin or H.P. Lovecraft. But there'd also be, Von Daniken and people like that, Morning the Magicians, Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, books Communion, that were also in the bookshelves that piqued my interest. And so she was more than open to it all being real, not, being make-believe. So, and also when she'd watch things like Close Encounters, I remember asking, I remember seeing that as a kid, perhaps a bit earlier than most would. And she definitely introduced me to a different perspective with it that perhaps most kids, wouldn't have. That's perhaps a bit more typical nowadays, where, you're joining the dots between the science fiction and reality, and it being a possibility and not just make-believe. And really from quite a young age, I believed that there was a possibility. So though on one side I was into things like Lake Seven, Doctor Who, things like that were fun, I also very much was into, to an extent, obviously we didn't have the internet then, kind of, as I say, things like Morning the Magicians, the whole area of Von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods. Now, she got her interest, I think, from my great-grandfather, who was a tailor, or Mills, not a Manning, and he was out in Russia during the Revolution. He was a sailor. He was a local councillor for a little while in East London and was a popular there as well, and a teacher. Very wise man, and a sailor for a while, musician and a teacher, as I say. And he travelled, as I say, New Orleans during the jazz boom. And he I think, he filled her with lots of interesting ideas. I don't know if he was a believer in ufology, but he knew H.G. Wells for a while because he was part of the Fabian Society. Even though he didn't come from money, he was deeply intellectual, and I guess he talked his way in, and he got to know them all, and people like, as I say, H.G. Wells. And as a result, because he's quite a lefty, and as a result, he, I think, again, because War of the Worlds and everything, it really won my old mum's imagination. And I think living in a household, well, on the other side of things, my actual mum was quite cynical about it, though she was interested, but not really a believer. So I saw it from different perspectives, which is, after all, what life's like. But it was, as I say, just really, really fascinating to me. I remember a show called The Boy from Space, which probably most people have forgotten. You might remember it was on many years ago, that was very sort of uncanny in the way that it depicted the whole area of aliens visiting Earth. And it just, all these shows would win my imagination, but I also had a real interest, as I say, that I think came from my old mum and the family to an extent. But I did have a few sightings in my childhood, particularly in my teens. I had a bit of a nervous breakdown in my teens when my folks moved to Somerset. But I do remember seeing, floating orbs or lights that would sort of shoot off. And that really, then I knew that, hold on, there's more to this than just, me being interested in watching too many sci-fi shows or something. I couldn't have imagined that. And I think that was the connection with, as I say, with my old mum, because she was into conspiracies before they became fashionable and then unfashionable and now dangerous. I mean, you have to be careful who you tell. But in the old days, when it was just a bit of fun, absolutely, and for years and years, I'd follow these stories. And obviously with the internet, it's opened it up a bit more, but then you don't always know who to trust, because obviously at the moment with ufology, you've got so much information coming at us all the time, whether it's podcasts with real accounts that are genuine or perhaps more money-making exercises coming at it from an entertainment angle. That's where things obviously like Coast to Coast come in. They're great fun. A lot of people on those shows are probably genuine, but also it can be just sort of more entertainment, perhaps closer to the sci-fi than the reality, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, through my life, I've just always had the interest. The same, my old mum used to collect newsletters and send off for handouts and things, or that she'd get all about conspiracies. And a lot of it would be alien stuff. And that's how, as I say, I picked up on a lot of it. Also in the 70s, because my great-grandfather, who knew H.G. Wells, he was a Mills, as I say, but in the 70s, she met an employee of NASA, actually, when she was running a B&B for a short while in London in the 70s. And he told her that he'd seen proof, I don't know if it was for photographs or what, of alien life or previous visits by humanity to the moon. I'm not quite sure what it was, which actually reminds one a lot of that old H.G. Wells, The First Men on the Moon, one of my favourite films when I was a child, funnily enough. But she would sort of recount that to me, and I was like, wow, obviously, I mean, this was something my mum, who's not really a believer, would also tell me about and say, well, yeah, this definitely happened. And so growing up with those as influences, as I say, always sort of piqued my interest, got me really fascinated in the whole subject. And I mean, I live in a UFO hotspot now. So, see, as I said earlier, near a nuclear power station, Glastonbury, and occasionally, you do see sightings. It's possible to see the odd mysterious light. But the best sighting I've had in recent years was actually last year. I had two. One was in recent years, most notable. One was in West Dulwich, which was last October, when I think, to be honest, from listening to a lot of kind of encounter shows and podcasts and things, one can easily, but as I was living on my own at that point as well, which I think helps, no real influences. I think as a result, I was really, really into it. I was also working from home and talking to the odd friend about it, but not ever really talking to anyone that was dead set against it. So perhaps I was very much normalizing it in my own head. I've often wondered, what was it? It almost seems like I made it happen almost, but I didn't hallucinate. It was quite extraordinary. I left the house. I was just literally walking past West Side train station, and this sort of was pretty big black triangle came over, and it was making a whirring noise, which makes me wonder if it was a military. But there were people there, and they weren't looking up, which I couldn't understand. I tried to grab a rather clumsy photo. It didn't come out very well, which is what they all say. I kind of can understand how that happens now, because when you actually see something and you've kind of wanted to see it and it actually happens, you can't believe it's actually happening for a minute. And so I can imagine that's, I know a lot of the cynics say, oh, yeah, they're just making it up. But honestly, I can see how it happens. You get a sort of body freeze for a second where you're so excited. And so to this day, I wish I'd videoed it. But as I say, it may have been military, but it was an extraordinary, very impressive. I'd love to think it was the real thing, so to speak. And as I say, it flew over West Dulwich train station. I felt like Arthur Dent. It felt like something out of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was a bit surreal, to be honest. It was an amazing moment. A few years earlier, I also had something. I was flying over the Grand Canyon, completely different part of the world. This is when I was working, even though I'm a musician, writer and artist, I was working for a few years on architecture design shows. And we were on the way to one of these events, and I was flying above the Grand Canyon, and there was these blinding lights that was sort of, now I could, again, there were people on the plane. They didn't seem to be looking. It reminded me a little bit of the William Shatner Twilight Zone episode where with the alien on the wing. It was very funny, that episode. I used to love watching that for a giggle. But I sort of looking down, and there's like loads of these sort of very bright lights. I mean, it's so bright, a bit like when you look at the sun. It's not a good idea to keep looking because your eyes will hurt. And there were about 4 or 5 of them down there. I mean, they were bright. And anyway, I got to the event in Arizona, I think it was. And when I got back, I says, I've got to look this up. And so I looked it all up. And yeah, lo and behold, there are very similar pictures online of Grand Canyon UFOs. Same with black triangles in the UK. It seems to be quite a lot of sightings. So those are 2 of my sort of biggest sightings. I used to see sort of glowing orbs a little bit on the horizon that would shoot off, as I say, in my teens a little bit. But those have sort of been the main things in recent times in terms of, concrete sightings that I've had. But I've always, as I say, had an interest. I mean, when I enjoyed a hobby of writing, and I remember getting a phone call from a very bizarre conspiracy theorist called Anthony J. Hilder, who was, I don't know if you remember him, but he was like this very extreme, quite ahead of his time, like an extremer version of David Icke almost, but kind of, he would talk a lot about skull and bones and Satanism and secret societies and aliens and things. And I knew of him because I'd also written to Richard D. Hall, who in 2011 about my book that I'd written, which I don't know whether to mention or not, but it was like a science fiction thing about UFOs. It was just an escapist thing, really. It was just a bit of fun. And I put that out there, and I think I got this phone call as a result. It's quite funny because my particular book was rare because it was the only one that had been written about Vril, something VRIL, a power source called Vril. And there was lots of conspiracy theories about it. I read about it in Morning the Magicians. Anyway, when I was a kid. Anyway, he called me and he says in a very sort of thick, I'm calling from Santa Monica, USA. I'm here to tell you this is real. This is not, lies. It's all real. And he's sort of very kind of, I could barely understand what he was saying. He was sort of just drawling on. But it was great fun. I was very excited because I'd seen him, I think, once on one of these channels. Because for a while, I don't know how it happened, about 15 years ago on the Sky, somehow you got shows by people like Richard D. Hall and even Hilda about all these conspiracies and whatnot. Now, all that's been banned now by Sky. You can't get any of that. And even on YouTube, a lot of it's getting banned. But back then, somehow it slipped through the net. So I knew about him from that. So, he called me all the way from Santa Monica. In the end, we never met up. It was a shame because his colleague, his right-hand man, did call me, and let's meet at the Georgian Pilgrim in Glastonbury about it, but we never did. He died not long after. And the sad truth is, when I was out there, when I saw the UFOs in Grand Canyon, I didn't realize he was still alive then, and he didn't actually live that far from where I was living in Newport Beach. I had no idea. He was in, it's kind of a small world, but sadly I missed the opportunity there. But it would have been lovely to have met him again. So, I mean, through my life, I've had so many interesting experiences that have just kept me excited and interested in it. And I just feel that also because Catalina Island as well, I when I was out in America, I lived opposite there, and I used to see lights occasionally, but nothing that significant. And again, in hindsight, I've heard, obviously with the Tic Tac incident, that I was also in quite a very significant hotspot. Funnily enough, around the time of that Tic Tac incident in 2018, I was actually living out there then, but I had no idea at the time. So, I mean, whether it's the H.G. Wells connection or, as I say, my old mum sitting, as I say, she'd read a novel a day. She was fascinated, though, in the reality of it. I think that's the key. And I think she was open-minded on it. I got that influence. And so when I've seen UFOs, I think the other thing to remember is I think fear probably puts a lot of UFOs off from appearing to people because I guess sci-fi is kind of ingrain it in us to expect an alien attack or whatnot, like War of the Worlds. But I do get the feeling that a lot of them probably are very kind of peaceful and quite the opposite, and observing us, perhaps not as in a nasty way like H.G. Wells painted, but in quite a fearful way even, certainly with AI developing as it is at the moment. And I had quite an early insight into that for various reasons a couple of years ago. It is it's chilling really what the possibilities are with that. And so I think, obviously, with disclosure bubbling up at the moment with shows like Weaponized. I mean, the thing is, I did watch an episode of Weaponized recently, and much as I love that show, it was all about music, and I'm a musician, so I was like, I should be really happy. But it just rang alarm bells for me. It was just a long interview with Robbie Williams. I'm like, what's going on? So sometimes even the shows or even the things you think you can trust, you've got to be a little bit, I'm not saying you can't trust that particular show, but it put a few question marks in my mind. So there's so much information out there. It's just culling it all really and working out what's real or not. But if you've seen something with your own eyes, it's real. But it just gets frustrating, I think, at the moment, because you feel that we're on the edge of a real kind of potential breakthrough with UFOs and acceptance of it or alien life, but also there's something holding everything back, and it's like it's going round in circles. You're getting actual government public meetings or whatever about UFOs for the first time in history, but it's not even on the British news. You'd think they'd be interested, they're more interested in gossip. So it's a fascinating time. And as I say, right through my life, as I say, books like Holy Blood and Holy Grail, Morning of the Magicians, I was steeped in and all that. But as I say, it wasn't, as I say, solely from the fantasy angle. There was always an interest also in music. You know, people like Gary Newman and David Bowie and Ultravox would write songs about aliens. And so again, you know, I think perhaps those songs meant more to me because I felt that they weren't just escapist. I don't know. But certainly, as I say, growing up in a household where it was, as I say, believed in on one side, not on the other, I think it gave me quite a useful kind of perspective from different angles moving forward, really. But yeah, I mean, it's with the whole area, it's just about, as I say, being open-minded and receptive. And then I think there's a chance, you know, that appear to one. But I think, as I say, it's just about belief. But it's always been something that I've always been interested in, as I say. And I hope, you know, I hope that in the next couple of years, with the whole AI thing coming up, that if there is some sort of disclosure that's perhaps more mainstream, that it's the real thing, you know, that it is not some sort of faked, you know, thing. Because obviously people like David Icke, you know, whether you believe in him or not, they're getting sort of censored more and more. So it does get more difficult to know who's genuine or not. As I say, shows like, you know, obviously shows like Doctor Who and Star Trek and Hitchhiker's Guide, all these shows, they prepare people on one side of things, but they also leave people very fearful and unreceptive because they just think it's all fantasy. But life can imitate art, art can imitate life. So you just have to remember that, you know, that often the most amazing things, like, I mean, as everyone points out, the flip phones that we, you know, in Star Trek in the 60s, communication devices, I mean, we have them now with mobile phones. It's all come true. So definitely, you know, there's no reason not to believe. But I think, as I say, I would say that my main reason for coming on here is that I would say, as someone who passionately believes in it, I just think there needs to be a very measured new approach with it, because I just think there's too many UFO, almost too many podcasts, too many things out there where it's getting a bit confused with all the Russell Brands of this world coming in who weren't even interested in it a few years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So I just think it needs a clear kind of direction. Hopefully your show will be part of that.
Hopefully, but yeah, I mean, that's the problem with the subject. You know, you have got a lot of good information coming out, but unfortunately it's a bit like a polluted river. You've got fresh water coming down from the mountains, and then you have sewage which is being pumped into it. And unfortunately, that is the way the subject is. There's a lot of good information, but a lot of bad information. And regardless of what their agenda is, whether it's just to make money or whatever, I don't know, but there's a lot of rubbish. There certainly is a lot of rubbish out there, and there always has been. It's just, you have to kind of separate what's real and what's fiction.
Yeah. Well, that's where the NASA story was so important when I was a kid, because the fact that, you know, my old mum, you know, had said on one side of the coin, and she was a believer, that I met, you know, a NASA employee, believed in it, you know, he'd seen proof of alien life, you know, it was absolutely, you know, no, it was absolute quiet, 100% belief. On the other side, I had a cynic, obviously a bit more of a cynic with my mum, who was not a believer in it, but even she said, well, yeah, he definitely said this. He did say it, you know, and when you've got a cynic saying, well, yeah, I'm through gritted teeth. So I had as I say, a very interesting, well, that must be true then, example as a young child. So perhaps in a way, it, as I say, did make them more open to it. But I would say that, as I say, there's just so much information at the moment, which is one of the things about the internet, you know, in a way, less was more. Because when I was growing up, and as I say, you had books like Communion, and you could go perhaps to meetings of ufologists, or they're always going to be fakers, but it's so much easier now to fake with technology, so much easier to also, you know, try to make money from it in some way. That's why wasn't sure whether to mention my book. It was many years ago, and my interest in Vril, as I say, Anthony J. Hilder passionately believed in it as a free energy source in the Tesla mold, you know, and the Nazis were obviously trying to harness the power that, you know, people like NASA with Operation Paperclip tried to tap into. And he really was very passionate, Hilda, about the subject, and it kind of scared me a bit, actually, because I was only just trying to write a potboiler, a bit of fun, you know what I mean, a little sci-fi bit of fun when I was unwell and you know, something to do. And it was just really a case I got really carried away with the concept and the ideas, and as having written to Richard D. Hall about it, so that was a real eye-opener. And so, as I say, it was a kind of bittersweet to know that I was so near but yet so far from Hilda himself when I was out there. But as I say, in childhood, again, you know, a lot of heavy metal bands also into UFOs and all this. So I suppose, when you've got these myriad, just like anybody else, you've got a myriad of different directions from it. And it's, unfortunately, most people are directed, though, by the mainstream media or the mainstream entertainment world. And so as a result, they tend to sort of get their cynicism or disbelief from that, I guess. I suppose because entertainment has primed everyone up to be scared. And as I said earlier, with War of the Worlds and everything, it's something, unfortunately, it's quite a long tradition of people just assuming they're going to attack us. And I think it's that fear, perhaps, that repels them, because the same vast majority of them, I'm sure, are peaceful. But as I say, I think the next couple of years, I'm quite religious too. I do believe. So I think that the next couple of years with AI coming up as it is, where it's literally, there's a possibility it might attempt to replicate and overtake us. I think then you're getting quite an H.G. Wells type War of the Worlds scenario, or almost a Brave New World type scenario of how it's all going to unravel in front of our eyes. I think a lot of people are a bit in the dark about it, that follow the mainstream media and the mainstream entertainment. I don't think they quite realise. I mean, I've been watching a lot of debates and lectures by the creators of AI, so I suppose I'm a bit more clued up on it. But it is really quite terrifying. And I'm just curious, because I haven't heard a lot of talk on this, how the whole alien life, how that will all tie in, whether it will exacerbate or speed it up, whether the AI thing will immediately, that will be disclosure, or how it will happen. We'll have to wait and see. It is a bit like a real kind of sci-fi novel coming alive a little bit. I mean, I think, as I say, I mean, I've got a signed Ray Bradbury, and I love science fiction. I love Martian Chronicles. When I was a boy, I saw that, and that was a work of fiction that I believe, I don't want to scare people, but that could be very, I think, close to reality from studying this deeply. Obviously, not everything David Icke says is necessarily true, but if you believe in the concepts of, how can I put it without sounding like I'm kind of getting a bit too imaginative, but kind of like shape-shifting and everything else. I know from having looked into ufology closely that certainly there's a belief that's possible in reality, not a sci-fi, that there's a possibility of that, and that they might even walk amongst us, to quote. So, I mean, it's fascinating. There's lots of ways of looking at it, certainly with, again, everything going on with the nuclear situation, artificial intelligence, the war in Russia. It's all a bit dystopian. And I think because so many people are kind of programmed by social media, they're also, a lot of the active jobs and industries at the moment are all in technology. So a whole generation of millennials really have been sucked into thinking it's okay to never leave a machine, to always communicate only on a machine, to do things really that are quite anti-human at one time. And I think the whole AI thing is tied into that. It's almost as if we've all been steered. I think perhaps because I'm a little bit older, I can have perspective of it. But I had an unusual, I was brought up in a Steiner school to an extent. I missed a lot of schooling early in life because of illness. And so I think growing up, rather than seeing loads of friends, I was, spending a lot of time with older people, and one of them being into ufology. Obviously, as a young man, I obviously had a slightly biased view. But, I remember watching films like Close Encounters, but 2001 as well, and reading about, the Dogon tribe in Africa in Morning and the Magicians. And, clearly, these things were around long before the internet. And I think these were the things that got my imagination fired up, really. Imagination, people might say, exactly. And I would counter, well, no, I just think it gives you an interest. And I think it gives you something that you can take with you in life. It doesn't mean you imagine UFOs. It doesn't mean that you imagine. There's so many people around the world who see things, and I've seen things that, there's obviously something to it. We all know that. But somehow everything is geared to us not believing that. And then, as I say, I'm not anti-religion. I don't believe that, that believing in UFOs means that you are. There are references in the Bible and the film, etc. But obviously with the agenda that the BBC has, whatever that is, and with everything, I don't think most people really quite realise where we are with all this. And you have to be careful who you tell, which is why I suppose it's so great to come on a show like this to talk openly about it. Because, I remember thinking as a child, because I'm a musician, and I remember thinking, isn't it amazing that, bagpipes developed at the same time in ancient Mesopotamia as they did in Cornwall or whatever. And it's true, when you look, how did they know? They didn't have internet. Was it some sort of telepathy? They hadn't discovered each other. These were completely disparate parts of the planet. They weren't even, they wouldn't have known each other's existence, let alone letters or anything like that to say, hey, this is how you build, exactly the same sort of instrument, exactly the same point in time. So even things that are practical and scientific that science wouldn't be able to explain like that always piqued my interest. There's more to life, that there's more to human development or intelligence than we think. And it's the same from the perspective of all the alien depictions you see as shown by von Daniken. Though, again, you look him up and, just because one individual happened to hit lucky with the subject and do well, and that individual might have something dodgy in their past, doesn't mean the whole thing is nonsense. And that's the important thing to remember with all this. You don't shoot the messenger. And also be careful who the messenger is. So it's such a complicated subject. It's a very simple subject, actually. But in terms of who you believe and the perceptions of it, as I said, 5 years ago, people like Russell Brand weren't really talking about it. So clearly things are going in the right direction, but whether they're the right people to be talking about it, I suppose, is the issue a little bit. But how can we know until there's any genuine disclosures? But I certainly think that, looking back through time, another aspect as well, just to bring us up to date with a bit of a sci-fi connection a little bit, because it's like something out of a sci-fi. I was reading that DNA strings can actually be replicated and emailed and across and information by AI. And that, again, even though it's not really the alien subject as such, again, it poses the question of if life forms are coming from that angle, if in 10 years, 15 years, that was to say happen, if AI isn't controlled, and there's a problem with that at the moment, then one can imagine, that aliens, alien life would most definitely want to get involved. It's not a Twilight Zone or E.T. or some sort of fancy. They would definitely want to get involved and to either, control the situation or save humanity. It could even pose a religious question. So it is a very, very interesting time where you honestly feel that everything is coming a little bit to a head. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come on the show, because conspiracies, do exist. That's why it's in the dictionary. Guy Fawkes is the most obvious example. And I think that, certainly when I look back through my life, not only is it coming to a head, I think generally the whole UFO subject, but it is for a lot of people personally as well who've been into it all their lives, like myself. So yeah, I mean that's kind of where I'm coming from it really. I mean, I haven't had an abduction experience as far as I know. I've never had hypnosis to find out that particular angle of things in terms of actually having met any aliens or anything like that. So I can't sort of say that I have, unfortunately, much as I'd love to say I have. But, I think the fact that I've seen some very notable sightings, obviously firstly in when I was a child in London, a little bit later as well in Somerset, but certainly in recent years, so the Grand Canyon sighting, which I've got a good photo of, my own personal photos on my blog actually, and also the West Dulwich one, really, really have piqued my interest a lot again, along with all the wonderful encounter shows, particularly yours. I think are that bit more, believable. Because as I say, there's a lot out there that kind of, as I say, straddle the two scenes a bit in terms of they sort of bridge the gap between reality, which a lot of people don't want to believe in, the truth of UFOs and alien life, and science fiction. And with people like 2001 and Close Encounters, there's a kind of grey area, not quite science fiction, but almost. I don't remember there being at the beginning of Close Encounters a little thing saying this is a true story. Maybe there is. I haven't seen it for a few years. But as I say, there's lots of perspectives, with the extreme being it's all nonsense, it's all sci-fi, and as I say, lots of grey areas, not just of sci-fi itself, but of the whole conspiracy field and the whole ufology field itself, be it the Billy Myers or the Nick Popes, all these people, or the History Channels. I tend to sort of go more for trying to find the more subversive debates and lectures online and try and get out there and meet people. That's why I was sad not to meet Anthony J. Hilder properly. I could have, but it's by the by. And Richard D. Hall, I'm not so sure about. He's not so much a ufologist these days, more an agitator. But, certainly when I look at what's out there, I'm not agitator, sort of journalist, kind of enjoyable agitator. I mean, he was demonized by the BBC, but that seemed to be to do with something that wasn't UFO related.
Do you have an interest in the paranormal? Then you'll love the UnXNetwork.com. The X is your streaming audio and video for everything supernatural, strange, and mysterious, like UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, and so much more. From hosts like Clyde Lewis, Whitley Strieber, Micah Hanks, and Christina Gomez. Visit the unxnetwork.com show page for a complete list of all the paranormal programs you'll find on the X. Be sure to follow us on Twitter for updates at KUNXDB. Follow our Facebook group, UNX Network. Find the podcast on Spotify, iHeart, Audible, and Apple Podcast. It's time. It's new. It's the X.
So it is a very complicated picture at the moment, and quite also, how will the disclosure safely happen, if it can happen, or will it, as I say, it may just unravel naturally in connection with AI. And of course, there's also a new conspiracy theory on the block that there'll be a fake alien thing go on in future produced by AI. So that's going to make things even more complicated. So, I mean, it is a fascinating time. And if that happens, then the aliens might say, we're the real deal. We've got something to say about this. So who knows? I mean, all of these they all sound like sci-fi plots, which is perhaps why I enjoyed writing when I was younger a bit. But no, I mean, this is all 100% true stuff. And I think that, it's fascinating to see how it works, play itself out. And I remember lyrics like, when I was a child, I remember listening to Down in the Park by Gary Newman, and lyrics like "My love is a rape machine," and talking about clones and strange machines and aliens, and really, if you really study what's going on at the moment with AI and everything else, and if you're into what we're into, the art really was imitating facts. Whether it was Hawkwind reading too much Michael Moorcock, I think they even got him in the band at one point. Or Gene Roddenberry actually knowing ufologists in real life, which he did. We didn't know all that years ago. We just watched Star Trek. We didn't have a clue, But see, my old mum, as I say, she gave me that perspective, I think, because she was so well read, signed Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov's everything. But also, as I say, she'd met people in NASA that had believed in aliens. So, as I say, I was coming at it from all those perspectives.
I do like your term, Asimov a day.
Oh, right. I just made that up for myself there. I've just invented a word. There you go. A true original. Maybe it's Coleridge influencing me. I don't know if he believed in UFOs. I'm sure he did, I mean, as I said earlier, with ancient times, the Romantic poets, they were open. You look into the poetry they wrote, and there's loads of references to, because obviously they were bound very much by religion and Christianity, but, they were obsessed with nature and spirituality and the universe and our role in it. And so, absolutely, I'm sure that Coleridge, though he didn't write a poem on UFOs, I'm sure he would have believed in it all.
If I can remember rightly, Asimov wrote a book, and it was about finding God. So you had human beings that left the Earth in search of God, and you also had some aliens that left their planet in turn to search for God. And the two men, it escapes me the name of the book now. But yeah, that was an interesting one. And you're absolutely right when it comes to AI. I think when you have people that grew up pre-internet certainly have a different opinion on when it comes to AI compared to the youngsters now that are post-internet.
Yeah, not all. I mean, sometimes it's a bit like, I remember meeting a kid out in America who was about 17, and he said to me, I says, "What music you into, mate?" And like, music thing. He's, I love anything pre-1990. I said, "What?" Yeah, pre-1990. I said, "I don't listen to anything after then. Everything's, probably even earlier than that." And it sort of reeled off all these names of stuff from years ago. And not that he was correct. I mean, that there is good music around now, and you just have to search for it. It doesn't get as successful as it used to or should do because of the corrupt industry. But that's another conversation. But what that shows is that youngsters can think differently, think outside the box. I mean, you and me aren't that old anyway, we're quite young, but the point is, they can and hopefully will be a bit more different in future. But it's very difficult because if all and it's not just like this for young people, the same for older people, that if all your heroes, be they sporting, musical, film stars, whatever, they're all saying what everyone in the media is saying, which could be any, whether it's to do with COVID, the war, AI, aliens, any of it, they're impressionable. And we're all impressionable, even as we get older, particularly if someone's a favourite film star of ours, we're going to believe what they say. And that's the only thing, sometimes people think for themselves, but there's so many more external, as say the narcissistic nature of Instagram, Facebook. It's all sort of pulling people in certain directions often. That's why I try and steer clear a little bit of social media. But it's, as I say, it's just too much information coming at people. So it's a bit confusing, but there are a few kids that think outside the box. And I think, as I said earlier, it's the same issue with too much information on ufology. It's very easy for a naysayer to come up, for example. I'll give you an example. I mean, there's probably videos already out there. In fact, I saw one the other day where I thought, this guy's different. I'll give him a try. And I listened. I realized he was, I think he was pretty much a cynic. But he built such a powerful argument. All these people that I'd heard in the odd podcast or the odd UFO show that I like or would recommend that have infiltrated the stuff that perhaps is genuine, and that person has just come along and cherry-picked all the ungenuine stuff, the untrue stuff, and they've sort of lumped it all together and made it all look like a pile of nonsense. And so that's what I'm saying. It's just so easy to kind of, for the whole subject to get, discredited, which is obviously ridiculous. I mean, how can you think we're alone in the universe? This is what I say to anybody. Do you seriously think, I mean, and people that do believe we're alone in the universe or believe things as they are, i.e. that, nothing has been any different to everything the government tells us and everything. I mean, there are people like that, even intelligent professors. It's all over the place because we've seen that last couple of years that people will swallow anything if it's presented well enough. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, but I think that's very interesting with, I think, Asimov, you said about that, that plot line, because, again, that may be art imitating life accidentally or on purpose because, yeah, I do think that, I mean, one might even wonder, well, how does one know if grey aliens are even aliens or not? I mean, they don't seem very organic. They seem to communicate, from what I hear, by telepathy, but they could just as easily be AI robots. I mean, we don't know. I mean, the AI robots being created look so realistic. And as I say, there's reason to believe that they, unfortunately, it does sound like a sci-fi, but they could actually potentially, I saw this in a statement on having, wanting to pause for 6 months, the whole AI thing. There was a statement that came out, and I'm sure in there it said about it's possible for them to actually be physical outside of the robot realm, where they could actually, as organisms, DNA create themselves in laboratories. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's like something Soylent Green, but a million times magnified, would actually come alive. I mean, actually, it reminds me a little bit of an old Outer Limits episode, that one where the creature comes alive. Where I think it's one of the first episodes of that. It's a brilliant episode, actually. But again, this isn't sci-fi. This is reality, quite extraordinary. And in this old Outer Limits, this creature goes crazy and that he communicates with. Now, I mean, whether that sort of thing is going to happen, and that's what I'm saying. There, your example there of a plot line where humans left Earth to find God and aliens came here to find God or whatever. I mean, that's where AI is taking us away ultimately from God, even though many say, well, there's nothing more godlike than intelligence. Obviously, if it's artificial, it's sort of taken away from it. Even if, as Elon Musk has sort of tried to say, though I think one of the videos was a deep fake, you can live forever with like something out of, reminds me of Cold in Lazarus, the old Dennis Potter plot line where there's literally a head in a fridge and he can live forever through AI. I mean, these are the sorts of things that are genuinely being, discussed. So clearly, everything's going to come to a head, I think. And the religious questions and fundamentals of that, and whether it's a second coming of a Jesus we recognize or something more unusual, we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, whether it might all fizzle out and that actually, all the naysayers will just get deleted from society. We'll just all flip into the background and everything will turn into sort of AI mechanized world, and people will just have implants that make them, they're already doing it with Elon Musk and the whole Neuralink thing. It could be that, people will all be updated a bit like Microsoft Windows back in the day and no one will question everything and everyone will be perfectly happy by 2030. We'll have to wait and see, but it is an interesting time.
It certainly is. When it comes to AI, you have all the deep fakes now. There's videos, you can see of apparently people, and they're not people. It's all, it's all digital and stuff. So even now, you don't even really know what you're seeing on TV is real anymore. And especially, if you grew up with films like you said, 2001 with HAL, and the Terminator movies with Skynet. We all know what happened there. It all turned very sour very quickly.
Yeah, but there's also a lot of people, as I say, like the millennials, because I've worked in sales a lot in the past. And I mean, with a good salesman, they'll sell anything, and they'll make anything sound good. I mean, Adolf Hitler could have probably hired a team and they would have, this lot would have made it sound convincing. They don't seem to question anything, is what I'm saying. And it is funny. It was not funny. It's kind of strange. I saw a funny article actually in a subversive newspaper called The Light recently, which is a sort of Somerset publication, but it was going on about how he's a neighbour of Dave, I think I probably shouldn't mention it, a neighbour of a member of Pink Floyd, one that's left. And he was sort of explaining in this article that musicians just don't, from talking to him, he clearly, from a few moments, believes everything that everybody, in the media believes, whether it's about the war or COVID or anything. I don't know quite how he got on such contentious subjects so quickly, but he clearly has talked to him a few times. And this article was like, musicians, pop culture, rock, they're not subversive anymore. They don't want to change the world anymore. It's what their job used to be, whether it was the Pistols or or the 60s or the hippie dream or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it is more difficult now. But then, they've been so steered and controlled since the last 25 years with social media that is bound to go this way, because they think they're free, because everything tells them they're free, because we're all connected and we all have such connectivity that it seems that way. It's very easy to believe that. I mean, but you're right. I mean, even what you were saying, all the connections, like with HAL in 2001, it's a warning, and things can be real, that they really can. I mean, when I was messing about, as I say, writing about Vril, as a Tesla type free energy source that Nazis believed in and all this thing, part of me thought, well, maybe it's true. Part of me thought also, you shouldn't really write about dangerous things, but Dennis Wheatley used to. Don't want to attract any energies. But then part of me thinks, now that, people are really talking about things like this, that, for all we know, Vril, from talking to Anthony J. Hilder, is real, something like that. I think it probably is. And that's why people like Tesla got bumped off, I expect, So it's so many. It's a very complicated time with it all. And I just think it could be, as I say, the most bizarre situation playing out in the next few years where, is it a real alien invasion or a fake one? We don't know. Perhaps there won't be any alien invasions. I doubt it. I think it's more likely that the AI is going to be the problem, and it'll be more a case, as I said earlier, alien intelligence coming in to somehow sort of either get us back to what we were supposed to be or learn from us. And it could be quite a strange, situation. Hopefully we'll live to see it, but it is quite, it's frightening, but it's also exciting. I mean, the thing is, if you're in a situation where, there's a huge, pandemic, fake or real, or there's a huge war that's going to happen, and then, that people care about or don't give a damn about, it, depending on the media and the propaganda. But whatever situation or danger that's looming, they're all a lot more tangible than this situation with AI. Yet there doesn't seem to be a lot of sort of massive panic about it, just a lot of talk. But as I say, I've heard I've not really heard any direct kind of relating the two, really, artificial intelligence and extraterrestrial intelligence. And obviously, I've always held the belief that it's highly likely we're extraterrestrials ourselves, because we go against everything, all the nature on the planet. We're always going against it, whether it's to trash hedgerows, and we always seem to be. When the Adam and Eve in us, the part of us that's always been, I suppose, demonized to a point by Christianity, unfortunately paganism, but which is unfortunate. But certainly, because it's not Satanism, obviously, but obviously that part of us, the nature in us that Coleridge loved, etc., and he was religious, is something that we need to reconnect with badly. And it may be that alien life, once we've gone completely away from it, because we're literally like something out of the way it's going, Blade Runner or Tron or one of these sci-fis come real, then it may be a case that, if we really have become machine in future, that the aliens try to get us back to what we once were. If them and us are usurped by AI. I mean, if AI can literally recode itself a million times more intelligent than what it is, then really, I mean, it would be a sort of new god, wouldn't it? Sort of strange new techno god. I mean, it is. These sorts of fundamental questions are the sorts of questions that are being asked. Only a year ago, you'd have thought listening to me is either, completely bonkers or he's too much pot or whatever. But the reality is, this is truth. This is the way things are going. There's still so many that don't want to believe, partly because we all want to believe what we believe in. It's a bit like religion, isn't it? Or anything. It's a bit like if James Randi or whatever his name was came on here and says, "Oh, we all want to believe in UFOs, you silly man." At the end of the day, whatever it is, we all want to believe in certain things, but we've all got a right to believe what we believe in. There might be a grain of truth in it. In fact, whatever it is might be perfectly pertinent, but then it might be, it's all open to interpretation. And I just think that as you say, I think with everything as it is, I mean, I watched quite a bit of George Galloway. I quite like him because he's very opinionated and he sort of says things very much how they are. And even he at one point mentioned aliens, actually, though he's finally waking up to AI and its dangers, which is quite comical. But no, I mean, I've experienced it. I've messed around with ChatGPT a few times already. I'm a writer, and it's only natural that I was sort of, I suppose, curious. And it's frightening, because it literally talks to you. I mean, it's, I had a conversation with it in a sense where, I was trying to write a poem, but I wanted it finished in a particular way and I wanted it done in this style. And it did it and it was awful. So I said, no, I want it done in this style with this. And I suddenly realized, that in a way, AI can be an enemy, but it can be obviously in a big way. But the way it will lull us in is a bit like with social media, web dating, all these things that sort of normalize things we thought were dead weird. Much easier to go down your pub and pool than go online, people would have said years ago. But everyone's got used to it. Now everyone does web dating. In the same way, I think people just get used to a concept. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable. If it's seen as progress, they'll accept it. And I think also that's another danger where we're going, where AI, I think, might have to literally save us. That might be in a position not so much save us, but it might seem to save us because people will say, "Oh, look, it's cured all these diseases. It's helped us trace alien life. It's done all these things that might seem good at first." But the reality will kick in that there's no point in really. Now we're all disease free. It's a bit like the Morlocks and the Elohim, is it in War of the Worlds? Obviously my great grandfather met the writer, which is amazing to think. But, he I think, had it completely right. I think, in that, the Morlocks, I mean, they're the people that the unfortunates. I mean, society, record child poverty, nobody talks about it. We have prime ministers even voted in on TMS, people tend to put their head in the sand a bit. And I certainly think, sorry, I didn't mean to mention anything political, but I certainly think that the way things are heading, it's exciting. But it's kind of frustrating too, because you feel that the AI will suck people in, particularly younger people, into thinking it's going to solve all these things. Like everyone, as I say, socially uses it for dating because it's so much quicker and all this, but not necessarily. But I think when it actually turns around and bites us by collectively deleting us as a species, or it coming to a point where those with money are literally like RoboCop, they're half technology, and all the people with no money are organic, normal people, but they can't get jobs, they can't get anywhere because they can't do anything because they're not 1 million times more advanced like the rich people are because they've all had AI upgrades. Whether we're going to have some sort of crazy world like that, I think if things go that nasty on the planet, which we're halfway there anyway, I definitely think either God, Jesus, aliens. I think from all perspectives maybe they're the same thing. As von Daniken once said, God drives a flying saucer. But whichever way you're coming at it with, you do feel, theoretically, we're all coming to a sort of a crisis, whether you call it end times, whether it will happen in the next 2 months, 2 years, 2 decades. That's another thing. It's very difficult to know how and when, be it the AI, apocalypse, if that's what it is, or revolution, and the disclosure, or they're kind of concurrent, of alien life. You've kind of got the two things at the same time. It's almost like a race. Maybe that's why there's so many wacky views at the moment. There's a possibility of a kind of staged alien thing, which I suppose could happen if certain species want to make themselves available to humanity on a peaceful mission or in a peaceful way. And obviously the powers that be are like, we don't want that happening because, that might bring global peace. So we better stage a fake alien invasion. I mean, that could be that sort of scenario. But again, anyone listening to this is going to think I'm barking, but that's fine. I'm a writer, I've got artistic license, but, it might sound like a flight of fantasy, but, these fantasy can become fact. And I genuinely believe some of these scenarios could play out. It could be the most extraordinary period in human history because we've never created anything on purpose. I mean, it's so stupid. It's more intelligent than us. So for that self-defeating act to happen I hope there's a few aliens with a sense of humor out there. I mean, it really is the geek has inherited the earth. I mean, if you're old enough to remember, how goth music, how we used to sort of laugh at the geeks on the computers, it's that lot that have took over, it's like, so, but yeah, it's, you've got to laugh or you go crazy really, but it's a fascinating period in history, that I will say.
Certainly. I think I first heard it from, it was Werner von Braun from NASA. I think he had mentioned about a fake alien invasion. It was a student of his, he told. And then I think she came out in one of the press conferences several years ago saying, this is what von Braun had said. And he said, you always need fear. And there's all these things which will happen based around fear. We've seen it, decades now. There's always something to fear. And he did say that I can't remember if an asteroid would be first or the fake alien invasion would be before it, but he did outline that, I think, back in the 70s. Wow. He had mentioned stuff like that. But that's been something which has been around for a while.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that, actually. I had no idea that idea has been floating around. That's interesting.
If you have a look on the Stephen Greer press conference from 2001, now there was a NASA employee that worked with him. I can't remember her name, but I should do because I'm actually friends with her on Facebook. And she came out and said, this is what he had told me. It was all to do with when NASA was airbrushing out objects, in pictures and then releasing them to the public. But yeah, no, she had mentioned that. That was a 2001 press conference with Stephen Greer. The very first one he did.
Yeah, isn't he the chap? Yeah, because I think I've seen some of that footage. I think he's the chap that says you can manifest a UFO or something if you like. It's like praying, really. He has a belief that telepathically, and I kind of believe in that only because when I had my viewing in West Dulwich, I'd been listening to so many. I won't explain what my lifestyle was like at the time, but I was living quiet. I was working from home, so I was kind of for a couple of months very much maybe in a bit of a world of my own. But it was as a result, I very much normalised the subject. So it was almost as normal as me to listen to a UFO podcast of a morning. I'd stick it on instead of the news. I got very kind of obsessed with it for that little period. That I will say. And it's almost made me wonder if you can, because I'm sure it's him that said, or maybe it's someone with a similar name, that you can sort of wish for it and it'll happen, because that's what happened when it happened in West Dulwich, maybe. But yeah, I've seen some footage, and it's a bit confusing, isn't it? Because people will have to struggle enough with the concept of there being aliens, and that it's not a sci-fi, and that it's not fantasy, and obviously now with everything, with certain things in the last couple of years where there's been a media story, so to speak, that everyone's believed about something on a massive level, where all our lives were massively disrupted, and people sort of went along with it, then it's plausible on one side to imagine people complying with draconian laws, staying indoors, etc., for some sort of alien invasion. But on the other side, with all the questioning that's a little bit more prevalent now, even amongst the most people that believe everything the news says, with a lot of the stuff that's come out recently, obviously people are also a bit more questioning. So we'll have to see how it plays out. I mean, people might question a fake invasion, and that might help people to communicate better with real alien life in terms of, these are almost all like sci-fi plots, because you really, rather than reality, but we know there's a more than a 50% chance that these could all be realities. But what I was going to say is that you can imagine that it could be a situation where, as I say, ET alien life might decide to help us to not fight the AI, but somehow work with it to appease it, if AI was to decide in future, like the teacher in the wall, Pink Floyd, you know, nasty sort of authoritarian figure, shake its finger and delete us forever, a bit like the space bypass in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy at the beginning with the Vogon captain, you know. Hopefully that's not what the aliens are going to be like to us, but I think it's more likely to be the AI that will do something like that. But yeah, it's as I say, it's mind-blowing, really. Fascinating, but mind-blowing.
Yeah, you should always definitely question when someone is telling you something 100%. On a side note, you know, if any sporting celebrities or music celebrities are trying to give you any health advice, I look at it as if I want to get health advice by someone that chases a ball, I will ask my dog.
Yeah, well, you probably can trust your dog a lot more than people, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the animal kingdom, dogs are wonderful. You know, I read somewhere, I don't know where it was on one of the, I think it was Coast to Coast. Which remind me of dogs a bit, dolphins, and that's a bizarre theory that dolphins might be connected somehow with aliens or alien, and owls as well. It's like quite extraordinary things, owls and dolphins. I don't know about the connections there, but it'd be fascinating to know. But yeah, I just think, like we were saying earlier, with it's just started all my life as a child. The whole area of, like, when I remember seeing the film First Men on the Moon when I was a child, which is like a proto steampunk kind of film, really. Made years ago, it was a wonderful film. But a lot of when my old mum told me about, you know, meeting someone who genuinely believed in aliens on the moon, that was it. You know, I was always, as I say, sucked in. And as I say, you know, my meager attempts at writing, as I say, doing steampunk myself or trying to attempt to do it. But when I actually got sucked into when you get sucked into the real thing, there's a real feeling you want to get out there. And I've very nearly gone to a few UFO conferences. I'd love to. And that there's a few. I know that there's one in Glastonbury occasionally, and not that far from me. But so I would love to go. I've never actually got to a UFO conference, which is this is my nearest to it.
The south of England definitely need more UFO conferences. Yeah, I was in talks with someone a while ago about maybe bringing. He was to do with the film festival in Gloucestershire, and I said to him, you know, what this place really needs is you know, like a conference, like a UFO and a paranormal conference.
Exactly.
You know, something like that. Now, I know you didn't come on to promote your book, but do you want to tell us about your book?
Well, I'm going to say I used to go to the Spiritualists Association a little bit years ago. They used to be in Berkeley Square in London, and they were. I only mentioned that as it reminds me a little bit of the communal feel of going to a UFO event. Must be similar, where you're meeting people all into things that were unusual. But yeah, no, I wrote a few of them. It's nice of you to mention it. As I say, you can cut out any mention if you want. But as you've asked me about it, it's nice. The Vril books. I might get back to doing a third. I've done a few excerpts on YouTube, actually, me reading episodes. Because as I say, I'm a musician, but I love writing. And this was about 10 years ago I wrote, and there'd never been any books written since Victorian times, when Edward Bulwer-Lytton wrote his tome about Vril, the coming race. That's actually, I think, either Hitler and his cohorts read that and were influenced by it because of the connections with esoteric and the whole that part of the world, basically Germanic, the whole kind of tribal thing of Norse legend and everything. I think the whole Norse connection, Nordic Norse thing, is what sucked them in on a racial level, perhaps. I don't know. This idea was I think based in a real, you know, fable, a real kind of a real concept going back many thousands of years. And anyway, he kind of mythologized it in his book. And I'd heard about this, and I realized it's not really been a sort of a sci-fi kind of done in the sort of Da Vinci Code way about the whole connection between Nazis and UFOs. Even though you obviously got Indiana Jones and all that, which was very frivolous and fun, there hadn't been a sort of more serious take where it's sort of more of a kind of, as I say, a sort of thriller. So that's kind of where I came at it with, the angle I came at it with. And it was very much, as I say, a kind of Da Vinci Code kind of potboiler kind of thing where I was just writing it for fun, really. I put it out there and I got it on an indie publisher for a while called Double Dragon. And it was fun. It sold a few copies. But at the end of the day, I mainly did it for fun, really, because the subject gripped me and I was ill at the time. And it was a good way of getting it out, getting me something artistic out there. But I think the best thing about it was some pretty good reviews. But I think the best thing about it was getting the phone call from Anthony J. Hilder. I don't know how he got hold of a copy, but he called me out of the blue, and that was amazing, really, talking to him, and that was kind of the best thing. I might go back to it in future and write a bit more about it and expand the concept. But yeah, it's fun because there's a few books have come up since mine actually, but mine was the first that actually looked at those specific concepts of, as I say, the whole kind of Nazi connection with aliens and Vril and this power source and the supernatural, and it was fun to write as a result.
The whole connection with occultism and the Nazis, it was very deep rooted. It was the Vril Society, wasn't it? That's right, the Vril Society. There's always been this very deep rooted connection with that, and especially UFOs. Interesting. What I'll do is I'll put the link below in the description. So if people want to head, it's the Vril Codex, is that right?
Yeah, there's the Amazon shop for it. I don't really, I haven't really, it's not that I've retired as an author. I still write poetry, songs. I'm writing a comedy book at the minute, but I might return to Vril, but I kind of neglected it. I've neglected it a bit. There's quite a bit. There's actually a YouTube introduction to it. Might be a good thing to include. It'd be great for me to reconnect with the subject again and get strongly involved with it if I can in the next year, because I do think that it's so important to say this period we're at for all of us, really. And we'll see how things play out in the wider society. It's very, very interesting. I think the key is really the whole disclosure movement is how it's going to happen. I think we're all curious simply because there's so many ways it could happen, whether it's a fake thing or, whether it will come through the conventional media, because there was the silly weather balloon stuff with the Chinese weather balloon recently and everything. And obviously that got on the BBC and they made a joke out of it. Oh, it's not aliens, ! So we're still bizarrely in that sort of, isn't it funny territory, even in 2023, which when you think all the things we've been talking about, it seems quite bizarre, but that's the conventional media for you. They're very clever at patronizing and fooling, the most intelligent people out there, like you were saying earlier, professors, I won't say politicians, clever at avoiding doing anything any good and getting paid for it. It's brilliant. I mean, wow. Goodness me. I mean, with everything, one wonders how it's all going to play itself out, because everything is so intricate with all the systems and the intelligent design, I suppose, that we called, whether you call it Mother Nature or God's design, it's so intricate and clever. You look at bees and the wonderful work they do and how, their work, how everything they do helps us, our health, honey, how wonderful healing substance that is. And royal jelly, of course, though, of course, Roald Dahl had fun with that wonderful story years ago in Tales of the Unexpected. But it's certainly, even with something like that, just it's simple, such as the times we're in, one wonders how insect life, how everything will be affected. It's like the butterfly effect with time travel. If truly things are going to start changing in the next couple of years, not just in the workforce, but across, the whole strata of humanity because of AI, it's kind of one wonders how it'll affect the animal kingdom, everything. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see again. So that's one thing that is quite extraordinary. Shows like The Invaders or The Prisoner with Patrick McGowan, they seem to tap into that. Those are two particular shows. As I say, the other one's Utopia from about 10 years ago, which got banned, which is an extraordinary show where there's sections where they talk about vaccines, which are quite bizarre, which very much fit recent events. And I suppose Outer Limits, Twilight Zone. But there's a few shows that evoke what we're going through. But
I am not a number. I am a free man.
Oh, yeah, because with the survivors, they're all amongst us, of course. They've just got a strange little finger. And people might laugh, but with a lot of these ideas, which, as I say, sounded so wacky to me 10 years ago, as I say, when I spoke to Hilda, those were the sorts of things he was on about. And to be honest, there's a lot. There's even, I'm sure there was some sort of government, someone in government, in US government, in the last couple of years, it wasn't even on the news, said that there was possibly, alien life and all this. And so it's really fascinating to think, that there's so many angles to it, it really is. And I think, as I say, I think it's just having an open mind. And not laughing and saying, oh, you've been watching too much. Maybe you need to put your box set of The Invaders away. At the end of the day, these things are real, And though, as I say, life, art, people can say, well, they say art can imitate life. And genuinely, a lot of ufologists, I've listened to a lot of debates recently, and there is quite a belief amongst some that there are, they do walk amongst us. As I said earlier, there's even possibility, if it's not, religiously complete profanity to say, that we ourselves are alien life to begin with, at least. So there's lots of ways of looking at it. But as I said so much today, we've had such a fascinating chat, and I hope I haven't blitzed you with too much verbal diarrhea, but it really has been interesting chatting.
It's been wonderful talking to you, Ben.
Just wonderful to have been on, and I really appreciate you giving me the time. And as I say, I've talked quite a lot. I probably repeated myself a few times. Hopefully it will be fun to some of the listeners. But no, thanks ever so much for having me on the show, really. I just really enjoyed it, and it's a wonderful thing that you're getting so many of these calls in. And what it makes me think is that people really, it could be the mixture of two things, isn't it? I mean, people say on one side of the coin, there's more. The aliens definitely are. You're totally right. Things are reaching ahead. Things are coming to a head. They're either coming or there's going to be disclosure. And on the other side, it's because people are desperate because of all the problems in the world, because of everything we see the last couple of years economically and racial tensions since COVID, all the things that have happened. People are lonely and they're looking, without religion perhaps not doing the job it did in the past, people are looking for something to believe in. So I suppose you got that, and you've got the two different perspectives. I wouldn't say the rational and the irrational, because those of us who believe know that UFOs, aliens, it's perfectly rational and real. As you can probably tell, I've been looking forward to chatting about it for a while, because I don't really have any outlets for this much amongst those I know. I write about it a lot on my blog, obviously, more as fun than anything else. But it's just been a nice opportunity to offload about it all, really, because it's always fascinated me, and you never know, the best might be yet to come.
Ben, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing that for our listeners.
Brilliant. No, it's been great fun, and who knows how things will go in future. I'll let you know if I, when and if I have any more sightings as well. And thanks for having me on.
Keep in contact and keep us updated. All right, Ben, you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll speak soon.
Brilliant. Take care. All the best. Thanks a lot.
Take care, Ben. Bye for now.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode. Keep updated and connected with the show on X, Facebook, and Instagram. And if you have an encounter that you'd like to share on the podcast, you can email me at ufochronicles@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me via the contact page on my website, ufochroniclespodcast.com. A big thank you to Ben for sharing tonight, and thank you all for listening. I will be back next week. Till then, stay safe and keep watching the skies. Goodbye.